Essential Self-Care Podcast, a podcast for those of us who are, let's face it, too busy for self-care. In this podcast, you will hear real life stories from people who leaned into their self-care as they were navigating life's storms. You'll learn practical tips, tools, and strategies to incorporate self-care into your own busy life as well. You'll hear from expert guests sharing their expertise on specific tools and modalities of self-care to optimize your well-being in your life, career, and relationships. I'm your host, Dr. Sheetal Ajmani. I am a physician, best-selling author, and founder of Radiant Living Institute, where I guide high-achieving women to get unstuck and learn to live radiantly again through major life transitions. Quick disclaimer before we dive into the episode, please know that this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not medical advice. Always seek the advice of your own health practitioner or mental health provider for your specific situation. Now, let's get started. Another episode of the Essential Self-Care Podcast. I am so excited today to be in the podcast studio with my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Denise Harris-Proctor. Dr. Harris-Proctor is an obstetrician gynecologist. She is an amazing physician, one of the most compassionate physicians I know. She has a long waiting list to be seen, and for good reason, for very, very good reason. And so, it is just such an honor to be able to have you on the show. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Really, the honor is mine. I'm super excited to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I'm really excited. I want to set some context for our conversation today and for what we're going to be talking about. So without getting into too much detail, I will share that a few months ago, I found some changes going on in my body. And I am in my early to mid 40s. And I'm not going to go into detail about what those are here today, but I just found some changes and I was not expecting that. And I started talking to a lot of my friends. So pretty much any woman in her 40s to early 50s, if you were in my life in some way, shape, or form the past few months, you have heard about this and we have had a conversation about it, and some men as well. So I really started just talking to a lot of people about it, particularly women in their early to mid 40s up to like early 50s, of just kind of like, hey, this is what I'm experiencing. Are you experiencing anything like it or anything else? And most everyone said yes, they are experiencing some sort of symptom. Like the exact symptoms may have some variation in what they are. But everyone was experiencing something and they were not expecting it. And I'll give some examples of what some of those things were in general that came up through many of those conversations. So there were irregularities in their menstrual cycles, either more often, less often, heavier, lighter, just some irregularities. There was hot flashes, brain fog, irritability, like changes in their mood, and fatigue, right? So a variety of symptoms. Now, here's the thing. We all know to expect menopause.
Yes.
Okay. And even as a physician myself, I was just thinking, okay, at some point in my early 50s, I'll go through menopause. And none of us, with all the women I talked to over the past few months, expected to go through any sort of changes within our 40s. And what that led many of us to look into is something called perimenopause. And what I realized is that this is something that isn't really talked about very much. And in talking to so many of my friends, many of whom are also within medicine, within the healthcare field, who also were not expecting these things. And so that's what led me to reach out to you and invite you to come on the show as an expert in women's health to share a little bit with us, and so that we can start having these conversations. One of my biggest intentions, Denise, in this podcast and in the work that I'm doing is to have conversations around these things that we need to talk about, but we aren't. And this was one of those topics. And it's something I'm exploring and leaning into a bit more this year, particularly. And so let's just dive in. I think I've said enough context. So, Dr. Harris-Proctor, what is going on in our bodies as women in our 40s?
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I love just sitting back and listening to you, Sheetal, and just to my patients about, when they enter into the 40s, it's truly a time of transition. And so many patients will come to me and they'll say, Proctor, I'm getting old. I said, no, you are quite young, but we are changing, right? And so, the average age of menopause, yes, it's somewhere between 51 and 54. But perimenopause can be that time of 5 to 7 years before. And technically speaking, once we're 40, we are still young, but once we're 40, that transition can start. And you're right, a lot of the common symptoms you might hear talked about more frequently, the hot flashes, the night sweats. But some of the things you named are just as common, but not as frequently discussed. And it is that mental fogginess. Some people just have this sort of newfound anxiety for reasons they can't quite understand. I think physical changes in the body. So many patients will come in and, talk about the weight gain and just how they feel different hormonally. And so, it really is a time of transition. But I encourage women to think of it as, again, you're not old, but we are changing.
I love how you phrase that. I love how you phrase that because I think you are right. We reach this point where it's, I suppose people can say midlife or nearing midlife. And actually, though, even in the medical terminology in the field of obstetrics, once you turn 35, you are called. Tell me why they do this. I do not know.
Yes,
but when you turn 35, if you're pregnant, they call you a geriatric pregnancy.
So you'll say, elderly multigravida, or some phrases that don't on the surface always seem to be the kindest.
So I love that you emphasize, though, that it's just changing. It's just transitions and changing. And that's such a big area that I work with women, not necessarily specifically within this realm, but navigating transitions in life. Like it's an area that I through for my personal experiences has been like career transition, career burnout, relationships, divorce, things like that, of just navigating transitions, and that have helped guide many women through. And I'm realizing also just with what I'm going through in my 40s, yes, both within my physical body with some of the things that we're talking about here today, as well as just where I am in my life. I'm finding that a lot of women I'm talking to right now in this age range are also interestingly, that they have reached a point where they are tired of living up to everyone else's expectations of them and are starting to really get clear or look for that clarity of what they want their own life to look like. I know I'm digressing a little bit from the topic, but
I love it because there's, one of the things that I, often try to, encourage my patients to think about perimenopause, or if you just want to say your 40s, mid 40s, is look at it as, a time of opportunity, a time to slow down, to reflect. If something's happening in you physically, biologically, that's one thing. But again, what's happening to you contextually, right? With your career, with your family, with your aspirations, with your past choices, and how you want to look at how they'll influence future decisions. So perimenopause, menopause, they're all natural transitions, but maybe they're there for a reason.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
To give women that opportunity to, engage in introspection, right? And to, not look so much for external validation, but look within, because that's where you're going to find most of your answers. Right?
Absolutely. And I think as women, just again, and I think there's so many factors that play into this, perhaps, just culturally, socioculturally, generationally, etc., of just where we have spent so much time, generally many of us, of of trying to meet some of those external expectations, right? Many of us, particularly women who listen to my show, many are high achievers, tend to have been people pleasers or perhaps recovering people pleasers and perfectionists. And so really using this as an opportunity through both an accumulation of life experiences as well as through honoring what your body is going through and your body's transitions and what your body is telling you. You know, one thing I always say is that our body's always sending us signals, and can we start to honor that? And also we know that it is all related. Like, I love what you said of also just looking at things contextually, you know, like our physical body, our emotions, our mind, like
Yes.
they are all interconnected, you know, where we are in our life situation, right? In our life context, like all of that is related. And so can we honor that? And another thing that I think about and have been thinking about quite a bit recently is just that as women, you know, our bodies do go through all of these changes that men's bodies do not. And we live in a world that has very much been set up like an external world, right? Like looking at our careers and the workplace and things like that, that are very much set up to this like
To a male
masculine
model.
nature, to a male model,
Yeah.
right? And one thing I've been thinking about, and I don't know if there's an answer, clear-cut answer right here, right now, but it's just something I've been thinking about is like, what if as women we lean into, you know, these natural cycles that our bodies go through and honor that? And how can we bring honoring these feminine aspects of both our body, our energy, our minds, into the things that we're doing, into the workplace and into our careers? And what if we like, how can we start to shift that paradigm as opposed to us trying to force ourselves to fit into this male model when our bodies are telling us something different?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, when you are in your 20s and you're in your 30s, you are just so gung-ho. You are, again, eager to please. And then, you know, a decade or so passes and wisdom begins to set in. And I think one of the things that as a woman transitions biologically, in a way, it forces her to really slow down. And to, you know, again, you know, look at what's happened in her life, the vision that she might have for her future life, and how can she, you know, approach that with some of the lessons that she's learned in the past. And I think that one of the best ways to get a person to slow down is to speak to them physically. Right? So instead of us, you know, looking at perimenopause, sometimes patients will come in and they'll say, "Proctor, it sucks to get old." And I'll say, no, you know, we are all aging, right? Even the newborn baby. But it's about how you do it.
Yeah.
And looking into, well, why is this a natural process? What is there in this that I have to learn? Right? And so that as we get prepared for the next phase, we go into that phase stronger, maybe healthier, definitely wiser, right?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
you know, don't dread it. Life, you know, I have a dear cousin who always says, listen, life is a series of problems. And it's about always about, you know, how do you approach them? How do you figure them out? So we have to sort of meet it as a challenge, but that in the end may be for our good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I love that question that you brought up of just what can I learn from this? I think that's such a powerful question for whatever we are going through, no matter what in life, of just asking ourselves, what can I learn from this? And you're right, life is a series of problems and challenges, but I don't think of it in a negative way at all. I think of it as each of these are opportunities for us to learn more about ourselves, to grow wiser, to maybe learn healthier ways of being, right? And so I really like that you shared that as well. I also think, you know, I think there's this notion or perhaps idea of slowing down as being kind of a bad thing or a negative thing in general. And the reason I say that is because I think there's perception. That's the word I was looking for. I think there's this perception that slowing down is not a good thing. You know, we live in a world, in a culture where everyone is busy. Busyness, you know, Brene Brown talks about how busyness is worn as a badge of honor, right? And it doesn't, you know, it doesn't need to be that way. That's ultimately not the best in our interest for our health, mentally, emotionally, and physically. But there's great value in slowing down. It can feel uncomfortable because for so long, many of us have worn busyness as a badge of honor. It's maybe what we're used to, but there's so much value in that slowing down. There's so much value in that taking a moment to pause, that introspection, so that we can, again, like you said, with all of that wisdom that we've gained, move forward in a very intentional way and decide what the next 40, 50, 60 years of our life is going to look like.
Absolutely.
Quick shout out to today's sponsor, Reclaim Your Radiance, Radiant Living Institute's signature coaching program designed to help you reclaim your worth, renew your energy, and restore your happiness in your life, career, and relationships. This 6-module curriculum has already helped countless women rediscover themselves through life's storms. From setting difficult boundaries within toxic relationships to finding their inner strength and power while navigating divorce and co-parenting, to aligning their career and business with their authentic self, and to learning how to live for themselves again after their kids have left the nest. This program has been a guiding force for women to live unapologetically and shine brightly within their lives once again, or often, even for the first time ever. Experience the results for yourself. Head over to radiantlivinginstitute.com/reclaim-your-radiance to learn more and get started.
I mean, I'm just coming to the point, I think, in my own life, my own career, where there are just certain life principles that I'm gaining such higher respect for. Slowing down is one of them. Simplicity is another. Being intentional is another. Busyness, I suppose, will have its time and its place. But I think when you actually are more intentional and slow down and simplify your life, that's when you're actually keying into your true purpose. That's when your senses are more alive, right? And so, that time of perimenopausal, menopausal transition, it might be God's universe saying, okay, great, you've done it your way for this half, right? So let's see what else the earth has to offer, right?
I love that. I love that. Yep, you've done it your way.
Yes.
This long. Now it's time to kind of take the hands off the wheel.
Yeah.
Let go of, I feel like that's something I've been working on. Actually, I feel like that's one of my big life lessons is like surrender, let go of the control, let go of like this tight attachment to my plans.
Yes, to your plans and actually,
And surrender
to societal expectations.
Yes,
Absolutely.
exactly.
And those people that we admire the most, probably at some point did that. And if they're lucky, they did it earlier.
Yeah.
Some of us are fast learners,
Yeah.
right? But most of them probably did it in their 40s, their 50s. And they listened to that inner being, right? That inner voice. So, when I think about that, perimenopause, menopause, ladies, we're just getting started.
I love
We're
that.
just getting
Yes.
started. Yes, to really enter into our greatness.
Yes.
We should be excited.
Yes.
And so, when that hot flash or that night sweat or whatever comes in, the first reaction is a little visceral. Covers on, covers off. But maybe if indeed you train the mind to then train the body, slow down. Let's just be in the moment. This is something I'm experiencing. Let it come and let it pass.
Yeah.
If you think
It's
about
not going to last forever.
Right. That's actually a beginning lesson for how do you meditate?
Exactly.
How do you really start to let the negative thoughts come and go so that you enter a space now where only the positive thoughts are vocalized, right? So what if you can look at a vasomotor symptom, hot flash, night sweat, in that way?
Yeah,
right?
that's beautiful.
And
That's
it's
beautiful.
great because, I'm a big believer in trying to use these sort of approaches, whether it be meditative approaches, food as medicine, exercise. Absolutely, the pharmaceuticals in Western medicine play such an important role. But I always believe in coming at things from multiple angles.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so those sort of lifestyle lessons, I think, are very, very powerful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. We had a really great conversation over coffee a few weeks ago about that, about how it really is, it's the most powerful when there is this blending of the sort of Western traditional allopathic management options and treatment options, including pharmaceuticals, as well as these other modalities, these holistic modalities, food, your activity, mindfulness, meditative practices, mind body practices, right? It really is kind of this blending of all of that that becomes most powerful. And I think really also, exploring things like we are today. We started this conversation talking about the physical symptoms of perimenopause, and we rather quickly went into sort of the emotional, the mental, the almost spiritual as well, talking about the meditative, the mind body, a way of knowing ourselves, as well as looking at our life more contextually and conceptually of what we want it to look like moving forward. So we have covered so many amazing things. Before we wrap up, though, I do want to take a few minutes here because I love where this conversation went. I do also want to touch on, just for our listeners, a little bit more of that physical aspect, though, of these symptoms, because that is going to be probably for many listeners, like you had said, that's usually what grabs our attention
That's
first.
the introduction. Yes, absolutely.
That's what grabs our attention. And if someone is listening and is like, I am experiencing some of these symptoms that you mentioned, and yes, I hear you. I hear what you're saying, Dr. Harris-Proctor. I hear what you're saying, Dr. Tamani, of using this as an opportunity. But how do I deal with the fact that I'm actually having these symptoms? Is this something I need to be worried about? Or is this sort of normal perimenopause? And, I always have a disclaimer on this podcast. Obviously, anything that we're sharing here is not medical advice. And obviously, it does not take the place of seeing your own trusted physician. But what would you say for someone who is experiencing any sort of these physical symptoms that we discussed? What should their first step be from that sort of physical side in terms of seeking an evaluation, or, what should they be concerned about? What should they go see their gynecologist about, or their PCP about? What should that next step be for them?
So the first step I always tell patients is just to be able to recognize it. Because sometimes, when you're in a fog, you have this sort of background sense of all the physical things you're going through, but you're not necessarily putting the formula together to realize, okay, this could be a perimenopausal experience. I'm transitioning. Just to recap, yes, those common symptoms are the hot flashes, the night sweats, mental fogginess. So what we mean by that is sometimes you're speaking and the word that you want to implement is at the tip of your tongue, Sheetal. And you're like, oh, what is that?
I think that just happened to me a few minutes ago, where I was looking for that word perception,
yes,
and it took me a moment.
Yeah. Well, it happens to us all, and then another one, honestly, sometimes anxiety. Patients have shared with me things that they have been, doing for years without a second thought. Something maybe like driving, right? And a certain path that they take. Why are they feeling this newfound anxiety, right? And there is just a fatigue. And sometimes that's related to interrupted sleep. Sleep is so huge for us as human beings. Yeah. It sort of sets the tone for everything, certainly the start of the day, and it can oftentimes be interrupted. But, thank God, although there are these challenges that we will encounter, they're not necessarily life-threatening. So just to be able to take that pause to say, oh, I think I know what this could be, right? And sometimes by the time I've met patients, they've gone through an entire physical workup, whether it's through their general practitioner or maybe there's another specialist they're saying, and they've gone through all these tests and everything's fine. And somehow they find their way to my office, and I'll listen and I'll say, you need something, and sometimes it is hormonal replacement, estrogen, progesterone. I suppose everything in life has its pros and its cons, but while a hot flash may not kill a soul, quality of life is important. Quality of life is important. And the benefits of sometimes implementing the hormone replacement therapy options is a huge game changer for quality of life. It kind of gets you back to a baseline that you're accustomed to, right? And then you can then prepare to engage in how you're going to handle the transition more clearly, I think, more optimistically, right? Now, for some people, they aren't going to be candidates to try hormone replacement therapy, whether it's going to be a prior medical condition, whether they're just not ready to implement that at that time in their journey. They have a friend, they have a family member who had a bad experience, and they are sort of afraid of living a similar story. So there is nothing wrong with starting with things that are, I think patients will refer to as more holistic or more natural, whether it is adjusting your diet, doing your best to going back to eating our whole foods, staying away from processed foods. You know, red wine, as good as it is, will bring on a hot flash in a minute. So maybe just tapering that back. Those, again, I think lifestyle changes can be very influential and helpful for women. I'm a big believer in just exercise. I just think, of course, even if it doesn't cure some of those symptoms 100%, it's gonna make a significant dent in the journey of improving them, and it just affects just about every other part of our being so positively as well. So yes, the lifestyle changes, it's always got to be part of your treatment plan. And then if that's not enough, you transition to the hormonal replacement therapy. Sometimes things are basic prescriptions that we as generalist OBGYNs will offer. And for some, yes, there could be a role for that, as we call the bioidentical hormones, for patients who might otherwise fail typical interventions. And, it's scary when you open up those package inserts and you read about the potential side effects or, the warnings. But again, that is something that you would discuss with your physician. And oftentimes those treatments can be implemented quite safely, and the outcome is worth it. So, yes, food, nutrition, exercise, hormone replacement therapy is, if needed, bioidentical hormones. And, there's always something new on the horizon. There are some other realms of medications that are not hormones, that more deal with our neurotransmitters, what we call serotonin. This can be helpful specifically with vasomotor symptoms. So there's so much to discuss. And I think it's just a great time to be alive as a woman. Right? To be able to freely have these conversations.
Absolutely.
Can you imagine what our ancestors have gone through?
And to have so many options and to have so many choices. And I think thank you so much for, running down a lot of those options, for running down many of those symptoms as well. I think, because that is very helpful too. And I think for our listeners, one, realizing that if you are experiencing any of these symptoms, I think first, just being aware that you're experiencing any symptoms, right? Noticing what's going on in your body. And then now, after having listened to this episode, thinking about, okay, this could be related to perimenopause. Now, certainly seeking evaluation from your physician to rule out, because depending on what symptoms you are having and what constellation of symptoms, maybe ruling out other causes may be important. Absolutely. Right? So I think just having awareness, if you're having any symptoms, and just having this on your radar, having an awareness of this, certainly seeking evaluation, making sure there isn't anything else going on. And if this is related to perimenopause, transition within your 40s, then knowing that you have a lot of options and you can have these discussions, right? You can have these discussions with your physicians, and that there are options out there. And I agree with you. It's a very exciting time to be a woman because, we do have all of these options, which is really, really wonderful. And a variety of options that you listed, both lifestyle, quote unquote, more holistic, quote unquote, natural, as well as pharmaceuticals, and we can explore these. We can have conversations about these, and that's what it's all about. It's knowing that you have a choice and knowing that you can have conversations about these. So thank you so much for being here, Dr. Harris-Proctor.
I've loved the time I've spent here. Thank you so much for having me.
This is so wonderful, and I look forward to having you on again.
I look forward to being back.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Essential Self-Care Podcast. If you like what you heard, be sure to subscribe, leave a positive review, and share this episode with someone you know. And remember, your free guide, 6 simple yet powerful steps to create your radiant life, is waiting for you at radiantlivinginstitute.com. Download it today.